For 17 years it was there, quiet, ignored. But what if that small clue was the last thing Madeleine left before she disappeared? Today we'll reveal the forgotten detail that could change everything, and that until now no one had the courage to hear. Some things we only notice when someone points them out, like a fallen leaf on the living room floor, always there. You step over it day after day, until one day you stop, and you ask yourself, how did I never see this before? It's the kind of question that starts to hurt when it's about a missing child. In the records of the Madeleine McCann case, there's something like that. A small, almost invisible thing that was there all along. It was mentioned, it was documented, but then forgotten, as if it was too unsettling, as if truly looking at it would put the entire narrative at risk. For years everyone said there were no clues, that there was no way to know. But what if that absence of answers was constructed? There's a specific and real detail that almost no one talks about, not because it doesn't exist, but because it doesn't fit with what's been accepted as truth. It doesn't shout, it doesn't accuse, but it whispers. And what if that whisper wasn't a coincidence? What if it was the only way Madeleine had to say something before she vanished? This isn't a theory, it's not made up, it's in the documents. But no one wanted to listen. And maybe if they had listened back then, today would be different. The cruelest part isn't what was done to the victim, it's what was done afterward with her silence. When a child disappears, the whole world focuses on what's missing. But sometimes, the most important thing is what was left behind. A notebook with a torn-out page, a missing toy, a phrase said and ignored. Small things that on their own seem like nothing, but together, they might form the last message the victim managed to leave. And the pain of thinking we had the chance to listen, but chose not to, is the kind of weight that doesn't fade with time. It only sinks deeper. Today, we're going to listen to what no one wanted to hear. Because maybe among so many theories, accusations, and silences, something real remains. Small, yes, but left by her. And one thing is certain, not every disappearance is total. Some are just silenced too much. If you feel there's still something that needs to be understood, stay. On the night Madeleine disappeared, there were many voices at the scene. Police, neighbors, parents, journalists. Everyone was saying something, but no one was truly listening. Her room was searched, the window analyzed, the scent tested by dogs, the records piled up. The commotion took over the world, but in the midst of all that noise, there was one thing no one stopped to hear. In the original police report, there's a note, a detail so small it's almost insignificant, too minor for headlines, too subtle to stir emotion. But it was there, officially documented, and yet forgotten. It was something related to an object of Madeleine's, something personal, intimate, that went unnoticed. Not because it was irrelevant, but because it was uncomfortable, because it pointed in another direction, and that, at that moment, no one wanted to consider. She used to keep that thing very carefully, one of the hotel staff reportedly said, but the phrase was never mentioned again. The focus shifted to DNA, to the parents, to the timeline, to the disappearance. No one thought a 4-year-old child could even unintentionally have left a message, not in words, but in behavior, in a gesture, in a detail. Because there's such a thing, a studied phenomenon. Children in fear sometimes react by leaving. Traces, scattered phrases, a folded piece of paper, an odd hiding place, an attempt at a signal that only makes sense later. But for that, someone has to want to listen. And the most disturbing part is that this clue wasn't hidden. It was recorded, mentioned, filed, but ignored as if it were just noise, as if Madeleine had nothing to say. Time passed, and the case was rewritten with versions, assumptions, campaigns, and rotating blame. But that detail, that small item left in the corner, remained there, silent, waiting for someone to come back. Most people don't even know it exists. Those who do thought it irrelevant. But it's not just an object, it's a symbol, a possible key, a reminder that she was there. And maybe she tried to say something. Imagine this, a crumpled piece of paper in the corner of a police drawer, an isolated phrase in a 200-page report, a misplaced toy, a broken routine. Any of these could be a whisper from someone who couldn't shout, but that requires listening, and listening to what a victim left behind isn't always comfortable. Often it's easier to say there was nothing, because if there was, then the responsibility shifts too. It's no longer she disappeared. It's she tried to leave something, and no one wanted to hear. And that's where the conflict lies, because it's not just about incompetence, it's about choice. Convenience, a system that over years preferred to silence rather than listen. Even when what was said had no sound, that's the wound that stings. We look at this thinking everything was done, but it wasn't. There was a real clue. Small, yes, but concrete. And it was set aside. Maybe Madeleine spoke. We just didn't want to listen. And when you realize that, you start looking at every silence differently. Because some things don't disappear. They just stay quiet. Waiting for someone one day to have the courage to go back and truly listen. It was just a detail. Small, silent, forgotten among the pages of a report too long for anyone to read carefully. An item mentioned once and never revisited. Officially, it was deemed irrelevant, but now it's everything. During a routine analysis by sniffer dogs, it was noted that one of them stopped at a specific spot in the room. Not in the closet, not on the bed, not among the clothes. In a corner, almost invisible, near the wall. The dog's reaction was clear, short barks, tense body, nose fixed on the floor. The note is there among hundreds, just one line. But what was in that corner? Apparently nothing. No striking object, no obvious physical trace. Just a toy. A slightly crooked teddy bear with a drooping ear. And its position seemed odd, as if it had been placed there intentionally, facing the wall, as if it were hiding something, or saying something. The most disturbing part, that toy was hers, and the next day it was found there. No marks, no dirt, but completely out of the place where it was usually kept. The parents said they didn't remember seeing it there. The police noted it but didn't investigate, and over time, it turned to dust. Now, 17 years later, the whisper returns, because maybe in that corner was the last thing Madeleine tried to leave behind. A gesture, a childish code no one knew how to read. The cruelest part is that all of this was documented, filed, but ignored. As if being small, discreet, childish made it less important. But the opposite could be true. Maybe, precisely because it was subtle, that was the key. And in that moment, the story changes, because what seemed to say nothing starts to scream. And those who hear that scream now aren't the police, it's you. When that note resurfaced, no one rushed to reopen the case. There were no headlines, just a collective unease, a discomfort that spread slowly, like realizing you've lived with a silent lie for years. One of the retired investigators from the case was blunt. We didn't listen because it was easier to follow the script. The phrase carried a strange weight. It wasn't anger, it was guilt. The toy was placed in a plastic bag, sent to the lab, and forgotten. It wasn't lost. It's still there today, stored in an archive of unused evidence, like so many other childish objects no one wanted to hear. But when independent experts began reviewing the material, that bear appeared again, and with it, a question. Why was it in that corner? The answer may never come with certainty, but the question is enough. Because in cases like this, the truth doesn't shout, it whispers, and only those with the courage to look where no one wants to look can hear it. At this point in the investigation, the roles reverse. It's no longer about the guilty. It's about those who ignored, those who saw and looked away, about a system that infantilizes the victim even when she tries to speak. And maybe, just maybe, to that toy was the last gesture of someone who didn't know how to speak with words but tried in the way she could. Now, we go back to the beginning, to the corner of the room, to the forgotten whisper. The truth wasn't far away. It was there all along, but we chose to look at the ceiling. Some things only hurt when the silence falls, and some pain only reveals its truth when we stop running from it. They always said there was nothing there, just a corner of the room, just a toy, just another fragment among so many. But when you piece together everything that was set aside, you start to understand. The problem was never the absence of evidence. It was the refusal to hear what doesn't shout. The bear was there, upside down, as if it had been turned on purpose, as if someone, too small to understand rules but big enough to feel fear, had tried to say, "Look here." A reconstruction by independent experts revealed something odd. The toy's position matched exactly the area where the dog signaled, and that part of the carpet had been slightly moved, as if someone had pulled it and then tried to hide. But this never made it into the final reports. It was noted, documented, but then shelved. One of the scene analysts, called years later to review the material, stayed silent for long minutes when he saw the sequence. Taken seriously, he only said, "Maybe everything would be different." That phrase echoes because now, looking back, it's clear there was a final gesture there. A child, alone in a room, perhaps in her last moments, did what she could, moved a toy, hid something, or tried to protect something. We don't know for sure, but we know she did something. And no one wanted to see. That's the wound, because absence isn't just a void. Sometimes it's full of signs, but we prefer to think silence equals nothing. Silence carries weight too, and Madeleine's silence has weighed for 17 years. Now all that's left is to reinterpret what was left behind. And in that process, something changes in us too. What seemed cold, investigative, full of technical terms, suddenly becomes intimate, because now you're not just watching from the outside. You're there, in that drawer, facing that forgotten page, that upside-down bear, that corner of the room no one wanted to look at. And the hardest part is realizing she didn't disappear without a trace. She tried to leave a whisper, but to hear it, you have to quiet yourself first. This is where the viewer becomes a character, because now the one holding that memory is you. You saw what no one wanted to see, and that changes everything. Maybe it doesn't change the past, it doesn't bring legal answers, but it changes what we choose to carry forward. You become the guardian of what remains, of what endured, in the silence, and that is a huge role. The metaphor of the whisper takes form. You feel the chill of the room, the silence that isn't absence, it's living memory, the page that weighs heavy despite being light, the object that doesn't speak but leaves a phrase in the air. What Madeleine left wasn't a perfect clue. It was an imperfect, human, fragile sign, but it was a sign, and now we can't say we didn't see it. That's the real turning point. The blame isn't just on those who investigated poorly. It's on us too for accepting for so many years that it was a closed case. But what if it's not? What if what she tried to say is still echoing? If that's the case, then you just heard what the world ignored for nearly 2 decades. Now, the whisper isn't hers anymore, and what you do with it, maybe that's the question we should have been asking from the start, because some silences only hurt when someone finally dares to listen. Some stories don't end with an answer. They just shift places. And now that this whisper has reached you, maybe it's time to ask, what else are we pretending not to hear? You know what hurts the most in all this? It's not the mistakes in the investigation, or the conflicting versions, or the gaps in the process. What hurts is imagining a child so small, realizing, even without fully understanding, that something was wrong. And trying with the little she had to leave a trace, a final mark, a last gesture, and no one saw. Or worse, they saw, but didn't want to listen. That's the kind of truth that doesn't make noise but doesn't go away either. It stays there, still in the corner of memory, and over time we even pretend we forgot. But one detail, a picture, a silence, and it all comes back. And now that we've heard this whisper, we can't pretend it never existed. I confess, when I read that line in the report, I almost skipped it. It was small, almost irrelevant, but something inside me froze, a silent unease, as if that child in that moment was pleading, "Please don't ignore this too." And that unease brought me here, because sometimes the truth doesn't come with a shout. It comes with a misplaced gesture, an upside-down bear, a meaningless drawing, a smell no one wants to admit. The Madeleine case isn't just about disappearance, it's about what happens when the world chooses to hear only what doesn't disturb. When we only look forward, as long as the pain stays behind the door, but pain doesn't vanish like that. It waits. And today, it spoke to me. Maybe it spoke to you too. And if it did, it's because there's something that still needs to be remembered. Some stories time doesn't erase. It just covers them with dust, until someone goes back and blows it away. The truth is, we don't know everything. Maybe we never will. But there's a difference between not knowing and refusing to see. What Madeleine tried to leave wasn't an accusation. It was a cry for help. Maybe a warning, maybe a goodbye. We'll never know for sure, but now we know one thing. She tried, and that alone changes everything. Because when a child tries to speak in any way, the only acceptable response is to listen. And if the world had listened back then, maybe we wouldn't be here today. But we are, and that still matters. This video isn't about solving an old case. It's about recognizing we failed someone who had no voice, and now maybe it's our turn to speak for her, to not let that silence remain just silence. If this story touched you, if it stirred something inside, the super chat is more than support. It's a sign, a quiet gesture saying, I heard it too. It's not about value. It's about presence. It's about showing you were here, and that this didn't just pass by like another video. Those who send a super chat here aren't just viewers. They're part of the memory. They're the ones who help keep this listening alive, who say, I also believe these stories can't be forgotten. Now, let me tell you something. There's another story you might need to hear. A child who tried to tell what they saw that same night, but was also ignored. The next video is about that. It's about the witness the police didn't hear, and who might have said more than all the adults combined. If this one left you feeling like something's still missing, the next video is what continues this wound. Because some truths don't end, they just move from one silence to another. And before I wrap up, I want to ask you something. Tell me what you felt, for real. Not as a viewer, but as someone who listened to the end. Tell me which moment stayed with you. The phrase that caught in your chest, or just leave a sign, so I know you were here. Write it in the comments. I'll read every single one. It doesn't need to be pretty or long, but let it be real. And if you got this far, comment, I heard the whisper. Just that. That's how we'll recognize each other. Because those who feel, know. And if you want to continue with me on this journey of listening to what the world tried to silence, subscribe. Here we don't run from pain, we listen and turn silence into memory. Now, let me tell you one last thing. Not with reason, with heart. Not every silence is forgetting, and not every voice needs to shout. To be true, we just need to stop and listen until the next whisper.